Also toward the end of his life, I think that there's something really important to be said about the last years of his life. In the Congregation of the Causes of Saints, when they look at someone's life, it's possible you might have someone who's very worldly, who would go through a conversion, and you always want to see at least that the last 10 years of their life, that they were particularly virtuous. Well, Sheen was virtuous throughout so much, really all of his life, but the last 10 years for him, I think, were a time of special importance. It was after he retired from Rochester, and then those 10 years from 69 to 79, when he was in a time of somewhat relative obscurity, and he didn't get all of the accolades that he had before. And I suspect that this could be a time of great purification. And I think sometimes the Lord lets the disciples go through that purification, in which all of his motives, you might say, were then challenged to say, is he doing this really for the Lord? Not because of the ratings, not because of the awards, not because of the public recognition, but just for no other reason than just to serve the Lord. And maybe to some extent, he may have asked himself, whether all of this was worth it, or whether all of his works had borne fruit. And maybe some of it seemed as though he was going to be last remembered for maybe not such a successful time in Rochester. But then I think the Lord granted him a very special grace just those 2 months beforehand. We've already mentioned John Paul II. But to see John Paul come to Bishop Sheen, to come to New York, Sheen had already had some cardiac trouble, so he was not in the best of health, and he would pass a couple months later. But even then, he did not take the place of honor, like the gospel parable says, don't go to the highest place. He did go to the lowest place. He was not in any particular place of attention, but John Paul called him. He called him up higher, and that was such a remarkable scene. And of course, he was ready to prostrate and to bow down before the Holy Father, but for the Holy Father to raise him up and then to validate all of the work of his life with that simple sentence, those two sentences that he said, that yes, you have written and spoken well of our Lord Jesus Christ. What a validation. It's to have someone pronounce the value of all of that work that he had done, I think was such a capstone and a confirmation of the value of that, that he has been a loyal son of the church. And that was really all Fulton Sheen ever wanted to be.